All right, so the first panelist will give Heike a chance to come in. Each presenter has 20 minutes. I've got the stopwatch. I'll press it, I'll give an indication beforehand, just to allow for discussion time as well. So 20 minutes, welcome Heike. Can you hear us? Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear us? Welcome and good morning Heike. All right.
I do hear you.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us. It will be you first on for this morning's session. And we'll be giving you 20 minutes for your presentation.
Okay.
Thereafter we will drop the screen so you can still hear us for the rest of the presenters and then to participate in the discussion.
All right.
So off you go, you're on first. Thank you.
There seem to be some interruptions.
The regular
We can hear you.
We can hear you, please go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. The topic is the World Political Party. I mean, we are in a crisis of the capitalist world economy in 2020. There's a state of emergency across Europe at the moment, the coronavirus, etc. That's one sign of the world risk society and one of the effects of globalization as well. We have at the same time the collapse of the global financial markets that has been caused, at least triggered by the virus, but I mean the true causes lie somewhere else. They're inherent to the mechanisms and processes of the financial markets themselves. Myself, I anticipated already years ago that we are likely to see the biggest crash ever, accompanied by a deep global depression by 2020 or so. And this is indeed what seems to be happening. So we have a crisis, and crisis is always existential. It's a turning point in a process that decides whether a particular identity or system will continue in its previous form. And this is another occasion of crisis that we are facing at the moment. Crisis, they can be seen simultaneous as threats to something, but they are also opportunities to learn. Etymologically speaking, the word crisis is very closely related to the word critique, and what always occurs in the context of this kind of a crisis.
You know what might be useful is to drop, if you can drop the visuals, then maybe it sort of speeds up the
interpretations of what is going on. And for instance, if you attempt to frame the global financial crisis only in terms of the virus, is one such attempt. I mean, if you don't see how the inherent mechanisms of finance are actually causing the crisis, we are then quite misled in our practical actions as well. Crises are also inherently occasions of power struggles as well. So there's always many different possibilities, a myriad of different possibilities that are open in the context of any crisis. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay, the first concept that I want to stress here is the concept of hollow reflexivity, which I think is something that is essential to the left perspective on politics. What does it mean? The reflexivity means the ability to reflect upon one's own conditions in a way that one sees them as something that can be changed. Then we see simultaneously that the conditions of everyday life everywhere on the planet are interconnected in all kinds of ways, in very intensive ways. And this connection means we put the prefix hollow before the term reflexivity, and we get the word hollow reflexivity referring to the capacity to see things in terms of the planetary whole, its mechanisms, its processes, its flows. And this is the dynamic
We've lost him.
Okay, our internet is fine.
Is it his side?
It's his side?
Well, our internet is fine.
Oh, do we have him on WhatsApp? We could maybe just message him slow.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Just hear what's wrong. Come and just bear with us. I think we might have to, if it's slow from his side, we might have to just move the other presenter on.
Is he on WhatsApp?
So can we message him on our phone to say that they're
Yeah, I couldn't see go ahead.
Eh? This was here, if the problem is on his side, then maybe we'll go ahead with the other speakers.
Zelda, the other thing you could do is somebody can summarize it. We have got his paper. So somebody could
Let us just give him
summarize
let's just hear what it is that said, otherwise we'll do it. That's good.
it.
Michelle, I spoke too soon. I spoke too soon. I cast my evil eye on the internet. Whatever. I said, Finland. No one's eating with Finland.
The existing global political economic contradictions and other global problems can be resolved by means of collective national actions and by building better common institutions. And that's the starting point for the cosmopolitically organized left of the future. And I think it's important to see that because of the various waves of globalization since centuries ago, we are living in a world so vividly described already in 1848 by Marx and Engels in their Communist Manifesto that is deeply interconnected in many ways. This implies that to increase autonomy also in various local contexts, this is in quotation marks because I don't think that local.
Yeah.
Okay, can we send a message that this is not working? So
Calling
we
in.
might first again.
I should have some supernatural. I did not. Humor.
He's going to be like, I'm busy, I can't
Heidi, hi, it's Vish, how are you? Listen, man, it dropped. Now we're not sure, we think we have a strong connection on our side. How's the internet on your side? It's strong as well, okay. So somewhere there's a bit of a problem. What do we do? We were thinking of maybe having the other presenters present, and then we come back to you with and in the meantime, you could do a voice note for us. So in other words, record it on your phone, and you can just WhatsApp it to me, and we can then play it in the meeting. I'm sorry about this. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we'll continue with the other speakers, and then you'll send us a voice note, and then we'll play it. And everybody has your paper, by the way. So yeah. Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. So yeah.
Thanks, comrades, for your questions. But as you know, every revolution also depends on innovation. So let us be innovative and accommodating. And so, can we ask Quincy, will you go next, please?
Thank you. All right, thank you so much, everybody. It's really an honor to be here with many heavy hitters, and everybody here represents a whole, even they're here as an individual, but I know that the ideas that are discussed here are going to be transmitted everywhere, and I can't say enough how much I appreciate being invited. And just so you know a bit who I am, my history as an internationalist started in something that was referred to earlier, which was the failed attempt to stop the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's sort of where I cut my teeth as an activist and went down the rabbit hole of revolutionary politics. Went on to do a lot of BDS work for Palestine, a lot of solidarity with Zapatistas in Mexico. I'm part of a committee that regularly sends people down there to study. And then especially Venezuela. Throughout this process, I got in touch with and began to work closely with Joel Covell. That's how I really am here today. I met Vish and a lot of other South Africans in 2011 for the COP17. And South Africa, I won't say too much about myself, but I just wanted to note that South Africa, for me personally, this started in a lot of places. You could argue it started hundreds of years ago. For me personally, it started in South Africa, so it's an honor to be back here and to share with the people who I first sort of started discussing these things with. And I'm particularly also excited to be here alongside the proposal of Samir Amin, because that's also something that's been very influential for me for many years, so I'm looking forward to that dialogue. So in a way, I'm really here as a messenger. It's been an honor to come as a messenger with good news. We don't have that much of good news in the world, so I'm really an honor to share it. I'm curious, before this conference, had anybody heard of the First Eco-Socialist International? Raise your hand if you'd heard. Right? So there's a saying that bad news travels fast and good news travels slow. So I'm glad to it finally arrived. And I hope I can do justice, what I think is really a world historic event, and hopefully something that can really have a great effect in our countries in the time to come in very practical ways. What I'm going to do is just give a very practical historical overview of the last 5 years in which this convocation process was explicitly happening. And then if we want to go and people want to ask detailed questions about, theoretical anything, we can go that into the Q&A. But I just want to, because folks haven't heard of it, go into just the history. So the first meeting that was specifically using the name of the First Eco-Socialist International took place in Venezuela in 2015, October. And it took place in the context of a peasants' movement, this organization called the International Guardians of the Seas, in a rural area of northwestern the state of Lara, Venezuela. And there were 3 days that happened in a row. I think it's important to give some historical context of who's the social base for this project. So on the 29th, they have every year in this campesino community an international day of seeds. People come from all over the country and other international delegates as well, and have a big barter fair where they're exchanging seeds, knowledge, plants, books, all kinds of things, cultural event. And then on the 30th, they had this big debate about, there was a many-year process, I'm not going to go into the details, of writing an anti-GMO, anti-patent seed law. And they went around by the whole country, by bioregion, working with farmers to write this law. And what they were debating on the 30th, and you can see in these two pictures both the kind of rally and then also the intense debating between different factions within the eco-socialist campesino movement about how they were going to pass this law. This is right before the National Assembly, the Chavistas lost control of the National Assembly, but the final act of that National Assembly, due to this campesino movement, was to pass this law, which is the first and I believe only anti-GMO, anti-patent seed law in the world, not to mention the only one written by farmers. That's a very exciting event. I think more people can know about it, and we can translate it and get it around the world. So it was in that context that we took a small group of people, had this crazy idea, we've been talking about it, are there the conditions in Venezuela to launch an international? So we said, well, let's go to this event, and we'll put it up there and invite people and see what happens. It was a very modest ask, and we ended up with this. This is one picture from that meeting on the 31st, and there were about 20 people. I mean, people came and went. The core group was about 20 people in about 8 countries. There's a lot of international people already living in Venezuela, from the MST groups to just individual radicals that have moved there. So that was the first time that this was really discussed in an explicit sense, public put out there. And then this led to the first of the documents, which is that are in this paper, which is called The Calling of the Spirits. And a small group of people got together and transcribed the notes from that session and turned it into a call. Because the idea was that, okay, so we agree this is a good idea, that this is a necessary thing to do in the world today, but we can't just do it ourselves. There needs to be a multi-year process of bringing people in to discuss it. It can't just be Venezuelans, can't just be Latin Americans even. There has to be a global, it has to be an international. So the idea was, let's have another preparatory meeting, but on a higher level where we have invited guests from around the world. So this document, The Calling of the Spirits, for the rest of, for the beginning of, end of 2015 through the first, most of 2016, was spent circulating this, whether it was, to some European socialist, eco-socialist conferences, it was read out in one of the Zapatista congresses in Chiapas, did our best to spread the word. This led to this Calling of the Spirits, Llamado de los Duendes, led to October 2016, so we got together about, we were about 30 people, representing 10 countries and 3 continents for about 3 days. We met in that same village. There wasn't quite the same dynamic going on because the seed law had been passed. I won't go into those details. But we spent 3 full days with delegates from around the world discussing the details of what this would look like, this audacious idea to carry this out. There were 5 working groups, which was, and these, I'm not going to take too much time to give you all the details, but I'm happy to answer any questions. The 5 working groups were criteria for participation, because, where we have to have some idea of who this is about. The definition of the program, the themes, what will be discussed, what will be the actions. Logistical organization, methodological facilitation, how are we going to make sure this is democratic, how are we going to make sure every voice is heard and recorded practically, and 5th, communicational strategies. So this was a small group, kind of like what we're doing here, maybe a couple more people, but very high, similar to here, very high level of intention, consciousness, and political will to carry something out like this. And then we got some press. Venezuela will be world base of eco-socialism. This is sort of the first time that the International was getting any kind of, the idea of an eco-socialist international, which was first proposed by Joel Covell and Meisha Lowy in their first eco-socialist manifesto, was getting some traction. But we agreed that this group of people was not yet an international. It needed more people there. It needed needed delegates from around the world. So this was just the second preparatory meeting. And as the next step after this, there was a collective process of writing a declaration to share the ideas, the conclusions that this group came to. And this produced a document called The Cry of Mother Earth, Call to the First Eco-Socialist International. So we translated this and spent the next year doing our best to spread the word. And just 2 things I'll mention about this, the conclusions that we came to, and the preliminary conclusions. One was that the criteria for participation would be people who had eco-socialist practice. So we weren't going to have bring the people who've written 5 books on eco-socialism to debate the best definition. The criteria for participation was that you had to belong to a movement or a collective or an organization that had some eco-socialist practice. And that was broadly defined. We weren't doctrinaire about it. It doesn't have to be seed saving. It could be education. It could be, but you have to belong to something. No loose individuals and not just academics. The second part of it was that the idea was that it would be constituted in a plan of action, in a program. That our goal wasn't to create a presidium or a committee, but that it would be a plan of action that the people of the world would come together and make for themselves, based on the principle that there's this lovely saying, I'm sure we won in South Africa, well, solo el pueblo salva el pueblo. Only the people can save the people. So we were interested in not making demands or denunciations of all the terrible governments, but what are we going to do? And so that was the idea put out there, that the Eco-Socialist International would be constituted as a plan of action. I'm leaving things out, but I just want to get through the end and then we can go into the details. So this leads up to 2017, the convocation. This took place in a different part of Venezuela. I can go into the logistical reasons why. Similar to the Third International, This all took place in the context of crisis and economic warfare and all kinds of logistical obstacles. So we had to change the location, but it turned out for the better. This was the second location. First one was in the state of Lara. This was in the state of Yaracuy, municipality of Veroes, which is historically the kind of the epicenter of the Afro-Venezuelan Maroon communities. I don't know if people are familiar here with the concept of the history of Maroons, people who ran away from the plantations and built their alternative societies. And there was sort of a process of rethinking Maroonage, cimarronaje, as eco-socialism. Because there was always polycultures, the people in the Cumbe always ate better than the people in the colonial societies, et cetera, et cetera. So we had, coming to this, as a result of the convocation that we spread around the world from 2017, that Cry of Mother Earth, there were about 100 people, 19 countries, representing 5 continents. I'll go into some detail about there was heavier representation in some places than others, for obvious reasons, insurmountable reasons, but reasons which need to be addressed and moving on with. So this whole thing took place in this kind of autonomous zone. There were 3 days of working groups, 2 full days of working groups, 5, and then on the 3rd day, every group came together, and we had this big assembly that went into the late night, where every aspect of this plan was gone over and read in assembly and debated in English and Spanish. Once we came to an agreement, finally, on late at 1 in the morning of November 3rd, we took it back to Caracas. This is a picture of the press conference. There was support for, this was mainly, it was absolutely a grassroots controlled and led initiative, but there was support from the Bolivarian state. It could have been more, but we got what we could. The 2 ministries which supported were the Ministry of Women and the Ministry of Eco-Socialism. So these are the 2 ministers there. And behind you've got delegates from Indonesia, Kenya, Kyrgyzstan, Argentina. Can't really, that's Amazon. And then we had, it's a big event, press conference. This is Hugo Blanco, participated. Folks may be familiar with him, Peruvian, Trotskyist, indigenous, eco-socialist. So yes, very exciting. Now I'll go into the details of this plan of action, and I brought copies for everybody here. So I'll hand these out, just pass them around. Thank you. There's more there than you need, so if you want to take 2 and pass on to a friend, that's fine. So, I like to say this is a document written by 200 hands. There were 100 people that literally produced the sentences in this booklet. I don't know, this is not a perfect document, and all the answers are not in there, but I just want to pay some respect to the sophisticated methodological sophistication of the grassroots Venezuelan revolutionary process, which is capable of doing something like this. I personally had never seen anything like it, where there was the political will to really get 100 people's voices represented. So there was a system of closed registries and open registries and assembly, and I can go into those details for anybody who's an organizer and wants to, those details I can share. So that's the methodology. Again, I said it's not about demands or denunciations, and it's about the idea that only the people can save the people. I'll say a little bit more next about how it's organized. One of the things that came up in the preparatory meetings was the need for, we started out talking about interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. Everything is connected, has to be holistic. But then we weren't satisfied with multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary because the discipline idea is sort of part of the Eurocentric tradition. And then also we weren't satisfied with so we started talking about cosmovisions, and then this concept of pluri-cosmovisionary came up. It's a little bit too much of a mouthful maybe, but I think that the conclusions were important. So how did we organize this? How is the plan of action organized, and how is this assembly organized? There were 5 groups divided into the table of elements, not the chemical one, but the ancient one, shared by all world cultures, the air, spirit, or ether, water, fire, earth. And then this is organized around an axis of time frames. So short, medium, and long term. Define short term as a time of struggle, medium term a time of construction, and long term conceived as even as a 500-year plan as a time of utopia. And this came up with the recognition that our historical problems go back to the witch hunts. You know, if we want to talk about something like patriarchy, we have to go back 500 or more, 5,000 years. So we're foolish if we're trying to think that we can solve this tomorrow. You know, there's a song, Indian peasant song, that tonight belongs to the enemy. We're all sort of in that situation. We need to have a long-term plan, 500-year plan, to achieve the things we're really about. So I think this was a breakthrough, and it took a lot of work and a lot of time to arrive at a kind of a paradigm shift, and it involved a lot of sort of self-decolonization. I won't go into the details, but there were the 3 years of preparation were not always easy, and we went on a lot of you know, circuitous routes, realized we were organizing things wrong, have to start over. The Vish mentioned that this event was you know, very much informed by and inspired by indigenous peoples, but they weren't the majority in the, I don't want to ventriloquize. There were groups from the two Venezuelan indigenous groups that attended were from the Amazonas and Sierra de Perijá, which are two of the most isolated regions. So they made a very strong contribution. And obviously the Afro-Venezuelan Maroon communities who were hosting us made a very strong contribution. But the majority, the majority was probably Afro-Venezuelan. And then beyond that, it was a really eclectic mix of Marxists, anti-colonialists, feminists, ecologists. It was a really big mix of you know, old cadre from the 1970s, kind of similar things folks you've here have been involved in. Okay, I'll move on. I'm happy to answer more questions about any of this. So subsequently, this is a slide of what we did in the United States. So okay, we have this plan of action. Nobody's heard of it. We have to spread the word. So 2018, this is sort of some of the work that I was involved in. Other people have done things in other places. We did a national tour. The two top posters were two different events we did in New York City. This is the poster of an event that was done in Los Angeles. And the biggest thing that we did, we had a national conference in Jackson, Mississippi, hosted by Kaliakuno. I'm sure some of you know Cooperation Jackson is one of the most exciting revolutionary organizations in the United States today, explicitly eco-socialist movement organization. So they convened a national meeting. We were actually discussing Samir Amin there. A couple days later, they did a conference call with him. Discussing, we formed a network in the United States of organizations, individuals, and movements that adhere to the plan of action. And that's, you know, churning along, gradually making its way. There is also in the plan of action, if you flip to the second or third to last page, there's a root of struggle. So part of the organizational concept here is that we needed to have sort of a geographic, territorial plan for how this was going to be carried around the world. And we identified a few sites that came up in the different working groups where we needed to go, where the Eco-Socialists International needed to make an intervention, needed to learn, needed to participate and organize. So far there have been 3 events which have taken place on the root of struggle. The first was in Bolivia, and I'll say as a side note, this is not the Comintern. 3 minutes, shoot. This is not the Comintern. There's no, there's not a central committee that tells everybody what to do. But I will say I participated in this event, not in these 2. They wouldn't have happened without the organizers of the International. So this was Cochabamba, Bolivia. This was the Mesopotamian Water Forum in Iraq, and this is the most recent in Puerto Rico. Bringing together indigenous activists from Mexico with the Puerto Rican independence struggle led by Oscar Lucas Rivera. I'm going to start flying through the end. There's a cultural front, which I'm a musician. There's a lot of sort of my focus on a lot of this. There's been an opera produced that is sort of out of the whole idea of the International, drawing from experiences of delegates. And then there's 2 music videos. You can go online, hip-hop music videos of this. One of them, this one is produced in Tanzania. It's in Swahili, it's in 4 languages. The main one is Swahili, also the Maasai language. Now I want to focus on, in our last 2 minutes, on the idea of what we can do here. One of the things in the route of struggle was we recognized that it was really dominated by Latin America, and Africa was present. There were a couple delegates, but we lost one of our delegates. I want to show this. I should have done this earlier. My primitive show and tell. This was made for the South African delegate who wasn't able to come at the last minute, but this is, you can can see the two flags there. I'm going to give this to the delegate when we meet him on Sunday. We need to, the idea was that in order to bring in Africa and Asia, we need to imagine continental summits on the same kind of scale that happened in Venezuela and those countries. So this is one of the big ideas I want to throw out to this group, is can we imagine an eco-socialist pan-African summit of some kind? And with maybe the same thing, 3 years of preparatory process or more, you know. Happy to talk more about that. This is one of the few parts I'm going to give my personal intervention. Maybe I won't read the whole thing, but Ho Chi Minh had this fantastic quote. I'm just going to read a section of it. These days, nobody even knows what an international is. I got back from Venezuela. I said, "We haven't found international. International, isn't that an adjective? Is that a noun?" So I think we have to sort of remember. Ho Chi Minh puts it very well. He talks about how he was in Paris. He'd go to all these meetings. Heated discussions were taking place in the Socialist Party about the question of the Socialist Party should remain in the Second International. Should a second and a half international be founded? Should the Socialist Party join Lenin's Third International? I attended the meetings regularly, twice or thrice a week, and attentively listened to discussions. I could not understand thoroughly why were the discussions so heated. Either with the second, second and a half, or third international, the revolution we waged. What was the use of arguing then? As for the first international, what had become of it? What I wanted to know, and this precisely was not debated in the meetings, was which international sides with the people of the colonial countries. So this is, I think, the historic breakthrough of the first Eco-Socialist International, is that it's located in the Global South. There's a firm break from the Eurocentric tradition. It's absolutely informed by Marxism. It's absolutely inspired by the First International, and even the Third, but read the document, the language is very different. And the social base that it represents is very different. How to join, I know I'm out of time. This is from the last page. In the first place, we believe, along with Jose Marti, that the best way to say is to do. The best way to be part of the first Eco-Socialist International is to commit yourself to fulfilling one or more of the actions in the combined strategy and plan of action. And this way, your collective organizations will be part of the first Eco-Socialist International. No individual or group is the Eco-Socialist International alone. It is only when we are. Kind of harkens to the Ubuntu philosophy. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope there are many more discussions. I'm happy to answer a lot of more questions. And people might not even be familiar with what eco-socialism is. I haven't even gone into that. And if you're curious about that, we're doing a book launch on March 16th. Here we can talk about it Monday. Thank you. Sorry to go over.
Thanks, Quincy, for the visuals. And I think I'm with challenge or the quest, a proposal, whichever way we come to it. And also thank you for speaking faster than our metro rail system.
Well, that's not difficult.
There's nothing to beat.
There's a low bar.
I'm trying to keep up with Patrick.
Yes.
Can we drop that?
Yeah.
Dear friends and comrades, as a matter of fact, I don't know where to begin. It is time for the left to start acting and not reacting, because all our actions until today are just reactions to the attack of imperialism. From this side and other side, but we are reacting. We have the disaster and we react. Anyway, I have asked to spread the appeal of Samir Amin, which I used to call, it is his last will. I'm going to speak about a project we have been working together for at least 12 years. And we had reached higher level of organization in this project, especially with Hugo Chavez, apropos talking about Venezuela, and Hugo Chavez was the most enthusiastic known leader for this project. And I have quoted some of his speeches about that project, which was convened by Samir Amin at that time. And Samir kept not writing anything until I was, anyway, long story, but I was very nervous about that, asking him all the time to write this appeal. And he wrote it, and it was, by chance, the last thing he has written. Yes. It is a text, very pregnant, only 4 pages, not more than 4 pages, but summarizing everything we are facing. And therefore, I would like to jump over what we have been discussing yesterday and today in the morning, because I think we as left with a Marxist background, have reached already a high degree of convenience, of consensus about our problems. I don't want to start again with a preamble, telling the story of neoliberalism and telling the story of what capitalism has done and so on. I will jump all this, because this has been summarized in the appeal of Samir in a text like a telegram. Yeah? That's what we need. I don't want to start the demonstration of any new idea by Adam and Eve again in the sense of our problems. Perhaps there are some nuances, some differences in the opinion or in the interpretation of some phenomena, but this is the issue which will remain forever. I mean, the debate is running and it will never stop. So, therefore, after having this appeal of Samir, I have written also a very short article about that, with the aim how to materialize this idea, which we are not the only one who have thought about that, and we have seen here there are eco-socialists, and here we are yesterday with Patrick about the eco-justice and so on. So the idea is not new, but everywhere it is not more than an idea with a small start here and some start there and so on. So many of you who know Samir Amin, they know also that he was one of the initiators of the World Social Forum, one of the first protesters against World Economic Forum and so on. And his idea about this history of the World Social Forum is also known. It has done its job, but now we are using something new. So, what is this new? I was February 2019 also in Caracas in the founding of La Asamblea Internacional de los Pueblos. Yeah. It is the second step of the World Social Forum, something what remains from the World Social Forum was the Sao Paulo Forum, and from the Sao Paulo Forum came this initiative, and we founded the International Assembly there. Okay, it's something also good, trying to cure some of the mistakes of the World Social Forum, if we are allowed to describe it as mistakes, because the entire movement of the World Social Forum was against neoliberalism, and therefore the profile was not a real Marxist sharp profile, because anti-neoliberalism you have almost 90% of humanity. So therefore it it ceased to be a vehicle for preparing for struggle and so on. And therefore, the Asamblea Internacional de los Pueblos was from the very beginning clear only for anti-capitalist organizations. Very clear. So, and it's okay. Which is still not okay is, it is still a forum. And that is something which is very, very interesting in the appeal of Samir Amin. What we need today is an organization, not a forum anymore. And this is exactly the issue we are talking about. And this is exactly the goal of my article, which I call it the kickoff, because every idea needs to be materialized by people, by comrades. And yes, in this paper, I try to explain 2 or 3 things. The first thing is the huge problems we have to face. And as I have already told Vish, erecting the correct questions is a lot of work. Even the correct question, we have a series of questions. I don't pretend I have answers. Answers we have to find together, and there is no a definite answer which is the correct one with a stamp. This does not exist. And answers also are in a process. The entire issue is a process. The building of the international, the new one, is a process. Like he said, today I found it okay, a plan of 500 years and so on. Yeah, so, and I call it myself, it's a never-ending process. But we have to start. This is the most essential issue. That doesn't mean, it doesn't mean we stop the debate about many issues, but we start the debate and the debate is going on, but we have to know from where we are starting. And therefore, besides the questions I have raised in my paper, the kickoff, the difficulties of this process, there are other, let me call it, other ideological issues on which we have to agree before we start, in order not to pre-program our failure. And I have asked yesterday to put it as a discussion point. We are going to strategize in this work, in this process. What does this mean? It means we have to know an idea, a common idea between us. The so-called with a socialist tendency, with a direction to socialism. Yeah? So, therefore, we have to agree among us that socialism, I mean, what I called yesterday, we have to emancipate ourselves from the terminology of the Soviet Union, from the mistakes, and I call it mistakes, which have led to what we have seen in the 90s. One of these mistakes is the imagination of socialism, because they have built socialism. They called it. We have built socialism in the fact that we have nationalized and these industries and trade and so on. And on the date X, we have reached socialism. This is a mistake. We consider socialism is a higher degree of civilization, which we haven't reached. Nobody has reached it. Even the countries in which communist parties in power, we haven't reached socialism. they are making achievements on the way to socialism. And I don't have real imagination how this society would look like. As a matter of fact, it would be better. But we are talking now about this process until reaching this heavy to imagine, difficult to imagine society form. We call it socialism. So this is a main issue about our work, because we are not going to say in the date X we shall reach socialism when we make this and that. It's something ridiculous sometimes. But anyway, in order to cut a long story short, it's a work of many, many years. The idea of the kick-off is to bring some comrades together in a meeting to discuss how to maintain this process ongoing. That's the main issue, because it will never happen by itself. It needs a body to maintain this debate, to maintain the process. It's not only a debate, it's a hell of work. The debate is only one part of it. Exactly like I said, not only the debate, it is about the strategizing work from that. Because we have to start. When we are talking about the problems, there are organizational problems and there are problems of the debate, of the ideology. So, how to bring this huge fragmented left in the world? We are the majority, but our influence is so tiny because we are such a fragmented, chaotic, how do you call it, So, and therefore, I suggested a meeting, and I am very happy now by the invitation of Vish to meet other comrades, like Quincy, for instance, and like the comrades who have been talking about the equal justice yesterday, that they can join our process. They can join. Our main task now is to bundle all these processes worldwide in one direction. Unifying ourselves is one of the main tasks of this process. And then I had also suggested a place for having this meeting, but it failed after exactly 1 year of work, and I don't want to bother you with the details. It is distributed. We have now two options we are discussing still to have this meeting. One option is Vietnam, and the other one could be South Africa. And the criteria of where to do that, these are very pragmatic criteria now. With our Vietnamese friends, I have been discussing, I personally have been discussing an agenda for this meeting since, let us say, 4 months or something like this, and I have distributed the result of this discussion until today, which doesn't mean it is the final form. We are still discussing about this subjects. We have to start debating in the meeting, and I am responsible for session number 6, which is going to strategize how to build this body to maintain the process ongoing. And for this strategy, I cannot tackle all the problems of the left now, because there are many, many problems between the left parties, and the left parties with a Marxist background, very clear, that are locally or regionally happening. And in order to come into this now, it would be, yes, I'm almost done. It would be not very productive. No? But I would suggest some titles to be strategized from the very beginning as a base of consensus among the entire global left. And therefore, I admire very much this paper of Hayeki. I think he will be a very good contribution in our work, although we have different names for what we're going to do. But the subjects I would propose for a global consensus could be, for instance, the issue of socialist ecology that we have been discussing now. Also about the workers' rights, labor rights all over the world to be standardized. Third, very important question, also Samir has written a big book on it, which is the agriculture question, the peasants issue, which makes almost the half of humanity are concerned with this issue, and how the WTO is dealing with this issue is a pre-programming of a disaster. So that's something we can agree upon. Another issue is the financial structure, the architecture of the financial system, the international global financial system. We can, as left, agree on a common agenda. It is not a regional or a local process. This is something we can reach from the very beginning of our work, of our process for an international. Last but not least, I would suggest also a common attitude towards war and weapons and weapon production and so on. So, thank you, dear comrades.
I have to thank both speakers who a few seconds short sticking to it, and I think that must have been such a hard challenge, especially for Bamdula, so very appreciated.
Ruchidi.
Can I just check, are we have the voice?
We have the recording.
Thanks.
Concept I would like to introduce is that of holoreflexivity. Reflexivity refers to the capacity to reflect upon the conditions of one's being and actions. And the idea is that those conditions can be shaped. The term hollow in turn comes from Greek and means the whole. And the connection of these two is based on the idea that the everyday activities everywhere are directly or indirectly affected by how the world economy works or doesn't work. This is also very closely connected to the concept of solidarity. In solidum means to stand as a solid whole for some political changes. Because of globalization, the number of risks, problems and contradictions have been multiplied. There are also many possible rational responses and each of these rational responses constitute also reasons for holoreflexivity and solidarity. So that's the key concept also for understanding the crisis in the 2020s. This crisis, I think, should be seen as an opportunity, a new opportunity for the cosmopolitan left. We are facing a crisis of the capitalist world economy, but at the same time I also think that this crisis, our crisis of nationalist consciousness, very well exemplified, for instance, by the inability of Donald Trump to deal with either the virus crisis or the financial meltdown that we are witnessing at the moment. They are both also these two crises, interlinked crises that are going on at the moment, are also persuasive arguments for hollow reflexivity. I think more generally as well, and independently of these two particular crises and considerations, there's a very important task that is awaiting the left. The left is not exhausted as a project, but rather it has the task of extending social freedom and also overcoming ecological problems by means of emancipation. Emancipation means that we can replace unwanted, unneeded and unnecessary sources of determination with more desired, wanted and needed ones. And this is the process that very often leads also to increasingly self-determined futures. The existing global political economy contradictions and other global problems can be resolved by organizing collective actions together and by building also more adequate common institutions. And this is the task that the cosmopolitan left is facing at the moment. I would also argue that because of the waves of globalization over centuries, we are facing a situation where the condition for autonomy in various local contexts is our ability to transform the global context. And I'm driving local in quotation marks because I'm not only thinking locality in territorial terms, but also in terms of our workplaces, in terms of our social relations that very often are trans-local by their very nature. All this constitutes good reasons for a learning process. And the learning process is pointing toward qualitatively higher levels of reflexivity, ultimately toward hollow reflexivity. And this is the basis for developing global transformative agency. And this agency is in part based on the idea of a risk society. This concept is another concept that helps us to situate our task in the 2020s. We can see ourselves as living, at least in part, the second phase of modernization. Here, actors are increasingly forced to respond to the problems that were generated by the consequences of the first phase. And some of the problems are in common with perhaps with the late 19th century world. Some others are quite novel and indeed caused by the developments since. The world that we are facing at the moment is a common world. There is no outside to this world except cosmically, and there is no exit from this world. We have to live with this world and in this world. And we realize that there are all kinds of real dangers and threats that we are confronting, including financial crises, pathogens, global warming, nuclear weapons, etc., etc. On the other hand, these risks also create new opportunities for action and for new forms of agency as well. They in turn will shape the futures that will have to sustain us, but they will also help to shape new modernities that we can only dream of at the moment. So I think that there's plenty to do, both in terms of learning, furthering our ethical and political learning, but also in terms of creating new institutional and other possibilities, some of which we only can dream of at the moment. The one sign of there being space for this kind of a learning is that the right-wing nationalist populism and other similar kinds of myopic and xenophobic, etc. reactions, they usually fail to attract younger generations. And this is very important as well. So this is the basis of the idea of a world political party. Of course, we are facing up the shared risks on this small planet. We have also an acute sense of injustices and asymmetries of power. All these are very important, but what is also important is hope. There has to be a positive and rational direction for world history to go toward. This vision is the basis of the left vision of the 2020s and beyond. It's a vision that is aiming to inspire optimism and ambition about our future possibilities. And in order to truly inspire hope, this vision must involve political programs specifying aims and concrete utopias. Of course, these are always controversial, and within a global political party, there should be also all kinds of opinions about this and decision-making procedures whereby the party can decide what its line in fact is. But there has to be also something that is fundamentally shared, some kind of a basis for a world view. The essence lies in various political economy reforms, and particularly global political reforms. And these can also be characterized as green and democratic and socialist transformations. But I have to also emphasize that many of the most immediately needed reforms can be characterized as global Keynesian. And this means an attempt to regulate, control and tax by democratic means the systems of global capital. So, when we are facing this kind of a situation, there have to be forms of political agency that can also act globally. So if capital is global, democratic politics has to be global as well. For democratic politics to be possible, there will have to be political actors that are organized accordingly. And this is the idea, the fundamental idea of a world political party. The idea is also that this can't be simply a class-based identity, or the party can't have just a class-based identity. It has to have has to make a wide rational appeal across different social classes. There has to be some sort of a we, but this we has to be a kind of an open invitation. And that's the whole idea. Obviously, in the 21st century, many people are very skeptical about political parties based on the 20th century experiences. And this skepticism is very understandable. And this was also something that was inspiring the emergence of global civil society in the 1990s and early 2000s. But what is also noteworthy, of course, all of you are aware of this, that the anti-elite backlash has often been nationalist, xenophobic and authoritarian. So we are facing an increasingly authoritarian world at the moment. But I think this is only a phase in world history. The world political party that I'm talking about, it has to be able to come to terms with the criticism of the prevailing mainstream parties. It has to be able to cultivate a democratic ethos, something that is very close to the democratic ethos of civil society at its best. It has to, at the same time, be also able to exercise effective political agency, which is one of the motivating factors for people to be willing to participate in it. Compare this to the World Social Forum and the lack of motivation for many people to actually take part in the World Social Forum. One of the reasons, one of the fundamental reasons, was precisely the lack of effective political agents. So this is the basis, but this basis has to be grounded in something, and I think there has to be some kind of a wider and deeper worldview behind that kind of a party as well. Otherwise there can hardly be any solidarity. So to sum up, the raison d'etre of the World Political Party lies in advancing new institutional forms for organizing the planetary public realm. And there are different moments in this process which I have written about elsewhere. In the interest of time, I just focus on the key essential background conditions for this kind of a party to come to existence. The first is our capacity to tell stories, and these stories are always based on all kinds of metaphors, images, categories that we very often take for granted. And in today's world, those tend to be sustaining nationalist and parochial ideologies. There has to be an alternative, a macro view, where we see ourselves in terms of cosmological, biological, and social evolution. And the task of the cosmopolitan left is to further this process of social evolution in a way that is consistent with the continuation of cosmological and biological processes of evolution as well. We have to be the guardians of life on this planet and possibly elsewhere as well. But at the same time, we need also explanations of concrete events, developments and crises. And we need also rational responses to those. In other words, concrete utopias, or I prefer to use the term utopia, which means a good place. Utopia means a place nowhere. So we talk about concrete utopias, which in practice means desirable institutional and other possibilities. So the creation of the World Political Party is a process. It's a process that is already going on. In one way, one can see that it has been going on for some time now. But I think in the 2020s, we finally have a possibility of actually starting to organize that also practically. Future historians will look back to these developments and phenomena, and they think them in terms of precursors, something that came before, preceded what was to come. And these precursors include anything from the First Socialist International to the Democracy in Europe by 25 movement that is gaining some strength in Europe at the moment. So this is in a nutshell, my argument for a world political party. Thank you very much.
I could just see Mum just getting so excited. Could I ask, Vicious leaving, just a minute, but before we go into this, I think it might be useful if we could get a copy of that, either the voicemail or the transcript, or maybe both. I think just to help discussions and debates, especially when we leave from here, would be very useful. Sid asked, sorry, for our indulgence. Can we give him 5 minutes to make a contribution on Rojava to feed into the debate and discussion? Do we have your permission to do that?